Welcome to Golden Gate Stories, the place where the most dramatic, jaw-dropping, and satisfying stories are told in a way that keeps you hooked from the very first second. In today's video, you'll witness a situation that starts small but turns into a shocking twist. A successful, wealthy, and powerful black CEO is humiliated on a flight when a white woman shamelessly takes his seat. He stays calm, but minutes later, the truth is revealed. He isn't just another passenger. He actually owns the entire airline. This story unfolds across 8 full chapters, from the initial humiliation and arrogant looks, to the jaw-dropping moment when the tables turn and the black CEO takes back the respect he deserves. Every detail, every turning point will leave you curious, satisfied, and thrilled as you watch him reclaim his dignity and authority in the most unforgettable way. Get ready for a journey packed with drama, surprises, and moments that will keep you smiling all the way through. And don't forget to hit subscribe to Golden Gate Stories so you never miss out on the most dramatic, inspiring, and addictive stories we bring to life. That morning, the airport was packed. The echo of boarding calls, the rattle of suitcase wheels, and the hiss of espresso machines at Starbucks blended into the usual chaotic symphony of travel. Among the crowd was a tall black man in a sleek gray suit, his navy tie understated yet refined. His name was Marcus King, a name unknown to most ordinary travelers, but in the world of finance and aviation, it carried the weight of an empire. Marcus never liked showing off. Born in a poor neighborhood, he once walked miles just to get to school, lived on instant noodles for years, and worked every odd job imaginable: warehouse loader, waiter, even a late-night cab driver. Yet today he moved with the quiet confidence of a man at the peak of power, the owner of Sky High Airways, a global airline dominating dozens of routes across the world. And yet, here in this crowded terminal, nobody recognized him. To the passengers, he was just another well-dressed black man with a first-class ticket, and Marcus preferred it that way. Sometimes anonymity gave him the chance to see the world as it truly was. When the announcement came, first-class passengers on Sky High Flight 782 to New York, "Please board now." Marcus strolled to the gate, handed his ticket to the smiling attendant, and stepped onto the jet bridge. His mind was already on the shareholder meeting waiting in New York, where a few still questioned his capabilities simply because of his skin color. But before he could think further, the sight before him made him pause. His seat, 1A, window, first row of first class, was already taken. A white woman in her 40s, dressed in designer clothes, blonde hair styled to perfection, sipped on a glass of white wine the flight attendant had just served. She sat with her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone, radiating the confidence of someone who believed the world revolved around her. Marcus frowned slightly, checked his ticket again. No mistake, 1A was his. He stepped forward, calm but firm, and said politely, "Excuse me, ma'am. I believe this is my seat." The woman looked up, her pale blue eyes flashing with a brief moment of surprise before hardening into disdain. She smirked and replied, "Are you sure? This is clearly a first-class seat. I don't think someone like you could afford it." The words landed like a blade, thin, sharp, and cutting straight through dignity. Around them, other passengers turned their heads. Some frowned in discomfort, while others chuckled quietly, the kind of laugh people give when they think they're watching a little spectacle unfold. Marcus stood still, his expression calm, lips curling into the faintest of ironic smiles. Inside, old memories surged back, being denied opportunities, being dismissed on the street, being called the black kid instead of his name. But he had overcome all of it. And now this woman had unknowingly walked into a game she could never win. The air in first class suddenly grew heavy. A few passengers pretended to bury themselves in newspapers or phones, but their eyes betrayed them, darting toward the standoff at seat 1A. Marcus kept his voice calm, steady. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I'm certain this seat is mine. Here's my ticket." He handed the ticket to a passing flight attendant. The young woman, clearly nervous, scanned it and froze. Her eyes flickered with unease. The system confirmed it. Seat 1A belonged to Marcus. The blonde woman smirked, her tone sharp. "There must be some mistake. I've sat in this seat for years. And you?" Her gaze swept Marcus up and down, as if pricing a commodity. "Ha ha! You must be mistaken." A middle-aged man from the row behind cleared his throat, chuckling under his breath. Maybe he bought a business ticket and thought it was first class. A ripple of quiet laughter spread. Not loud, but enough for Marcus to hear. That brand of mockery, that smug laughter from people who thought they were above him, was nothing new. Instead of anger, Marcus tilted his head, lips curling into that ironic half-smile, his eyes flashing with something unreadable. The flight attendant, clearly rattled by the blonde woman's icy tone, lowered her head and whispered nervously to Marcus, "Sir, perhaps you wouldn't mind taking another seat for now. We'll sort this out later." The moment seemed frozen. Some passengers nodded in approval. Others leaned back, eager to see the drama unfold. The blonde woman reclined smugly, raising her wine glass with the air of someone who had already won. Marcus inhaled slowly, then let out a quiet laugh. It wasn't loud but deep, low enough to send a shiver through the silence. He eased into the edge of a nearby seat, set his briefcase down, and fixed his gaze on the woman. Calm, yet heavy, his eyes seemed to say, "Enjoy your little victory. It won't last long." From the corner of the cabin, an elderly woman with silver hair leaned forward, her voice a low murmur that still carried across a few rows. "That man, he's not just anyone." The quiet chuckle still lingered in the cabin, but Marcus sat tall, his posture steady, his gaze calm. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't angry, and somehow that very composure began to unsettle a few people. The blonde woman tilted her head, her voice dripping with triumph. "You see? Even the attendant suggested you move. So please don't make this more awkward than it already is." She raised her wine glass, sipping as if sealing her victory. A few passengers nodded in agreement. But from her corner seat, the elderly woman with silver hair kept her sharp gaze fixed on Marcus, curiosity glowing behind her wrinkled eyes. Marcus smiled faintly, and that smile made the woman's lips falter, as though her instincts suddenly warned her. Slowly, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small silver card, gleaming under the cabin lights. Few outside the airline's inner circle had ever seen it. The Sky High founder's key card, an identification card reserved for the owner and top executives of the entire airline. He placed it casually on the tray table in front of him, with a motion so light it almost felt like a dare. The lead flight attendant, just entering the cabin, caught sight of it. Her professional mask cracked instantly into a look of shock and then respect. "Mr. King," she stammered, her voice trembling slightly, "please forgive us for this inconvenience. I'll take care of this immediately." The blonde woman whipped her head around, frowning. "Mr. King? He's just a passenger. Why are you—" But before she could finish, the startled expressions of the other attendants said it all. In that instant, a ripple of realization passed through the cabin. This black man was not ordinary at all. Marcus said nothing further. He leaned back in his seat, arms folded, waiting to see how the truth would unfold. The first-class cabin froze, as if someone had pressed pause. Only the low hum of the engines outside filled the silence. Every pair of eyes now locked on Marcus, not with curiosity anymore, but with surprise, even a touch of respect. The blonde woman, once reclining with smug comfort, suddenly jerked upright. Her wine glass trembled violently, liquid threatening to spill. "Wait, Mr. King? You mean you're—" Her voice cracked, words collapsing in her throat. Marcus didn't rush to answer. Instead, he glanced at the lead flight attendant, who now stood stiff and formal, bowing her head respectfully. "Sir, we sincerely apologize for this inconvenience. This was our crew's mistake. Please allow us to escort you back to your rightful seat immediately." The apology rang through the cabin like a slap against arrogance. The blonde woman's face flushed crimson, color spilling down her neck. She stammered, I didn't know. If I had known you were—" Marcus tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips, though his eyes were cold as steel. "So respect only comes when you know who someone is?" Interesting. The words weren't loud, weren't harsh, but they landed with devastating weight. The passengers who had snickered moments earlier now dropped their gazes. A few adjusted their posture, suddenly self-conscious, as though trying to erase their earlier judgment. The blonde woman tried to rise, but her high heels felt cemented to the floor. She had never felt so small, so utterly humiliated. Marcus stood slowly, slipped the founder's key card back into his briefcase, and nodded at the lead attendant. "It's fine. Let her keep the seat, I think. This flight will be interesting." He settled calmly into the seat across the aisle, arms folded, his expression serene but layered with unspoken meaning. The blonde woman sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe. The air in the cabin was thick, heavy. But beneath that silence, everyone knew. A storm had just begun. The plane hadn't even taken off, yet the game was already in motion. The engines roared as the plane began its roll down the runway. First class was eerily silent. No more snickers, no more smug whispers. Instead, eyes darted discreetly toward Marcus, only to snap away the moment he might notice. The blonde woman in seat 1A sat rigid, clutching her half-empty wineglass. Her face was stiff, her eyes flicking toward Marcus before darting away again. The triumph she flaunted earlier had evaporated, leaving behind only anxiety and humiliation. Marcus sat calmly across the aisle, one leg crossed over the other, his hand resting lightly on his briefcase. His gaze swept the cabin, steady and sharp. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone carried enough weight to command the room. A young businessman, unable to contain his curiosity, leaned toward the elderly silver-haired woman nearby and whispered, "Excuse me, do you know who he is?" The old woman smiled, her voice raspy yet firm. "That man is Marcus King, the owner of Sky High Airways." The words landed just loud enough for several rows to hear, and like falling dominoes, heads turned, eyes widened. Someone even gasped, "The owner of this airline?" The atmosphere shifted instantly. The disdainful stares from earlier gave way to astonishment and a tinge of embarrassment. A few passengers tugged at their ties, straightened in their seats, trying to look more proper, as if hoping to erase their silent complicity with the blonde woman's arrogance. Marcus smiled faintly, though the smile wasn't warm. He turned his gaze to the window, eyes distant, as if the whole ordeal had been nothing more than a trivial scene in his life. But deep inside, Marcus knew. This moment, the heavy silence, the shame rippling through the cabin, was the most vivid proof that prejudice still thrived, even in a world that prided itself on progress, and he had no intention of letting the story end with just a few embarrassed glances. The plane trembled lightly as it climbed into the blue sky. First class remained tense until a passenger in the second row, a young executive-looking man, finally broke the silence. Leaning slightly toward Marcus, he offered a polite smile. "Mr. King, if I may, I just wanted to say I admire the way you handled that situation earlier." Calm, yet incredibly powerful. Marcus turned, his gaze sharp as a blade, but composed. "Thank you. But the truth is, I didn't do anything. I simply sat back and let people reveal who they truly are." A ripple ran through the cabin. Some passengers shifted uneasily, as if his words had stripped them bare without pointing a single finger. The blonde woman sat frozen, her wineglass trembling in her grip. She wanted to speak, but any word now would only deepen her humiliation. The silver-haired old woman chuckled softly, tilting her head. "You're right, young man. The world doesn't need us to shout to prove our worth. Sometimes it only takes silence for the truth to show itself." Marcus nodded, his eyes glimmering with gratitude. Then he spoke, this time to the whole cabin, his voice low but commanding. "In business, as in life, people often judge others by appearances. The suit, the skin color, or even the seat on a plane. But the truth is simple. Real power doesn't need to be proven. It proves itself." The cabin froze again. The wealthy, the powerful, the self-assured passengers, all suddenly felt as though they had been pulled into a classroom without chalkboards, without notes, just raw truth staring back at them. Marcus took a sip of water, casual as though he'd merely finished a passing remark. Yet for everyone seated there, his words would echo long after the flight. The blonde woman, silent until now, could no longer bear the weight pressing down on her. She set her wineglass on the tray with a loud clink that startled a few passengers. "All right," she began, trying to steady her voice, though it quivered. "I just want to say I didn't know who you were. If I had, of course I would have behaved differently." A murmur rippled through the cabin. A middle-aged man smirked quietly, though he didn't dare speak. The silver-haired woman shook her head, her eyes filled with disappointment. Marcus didn't look directly at her. He tilted his head slightly, his voice low but clear. "You've just said the most important part. The way you treat people isn't based on respect. It's based on status. That's the difference. The woman's face flushed crimson. She rushed to explain, fumbling over her words. "No, that's not what I meant. I thought you didn't look like a first-class passenger. It was just a misunderstanding." A young man a few rows back chuckled out loud, then quickly covered his mouth. Her explanation sounded more like a confession of prejudice. Marcus finally turned his gaze toward her, his eyes sharp as glass cutting to the bone. "And what exactly does a first-class passenger look like to you? White skin? A fur coat? A flashy gold watch?" The question dropped like a hammer. The woman froze, mouth opening and closing without a sound. Once again, silence swept through the cabin. But this time, it wasn't shock. It was the heavy realization that there was no excuse left to give. Marcus leaned back, sipping his water casually, as if his words had cost him nothing. But for the woman, every syllable rang like a verdict she couldn't escape. The plane had leveled off, attendants moving quietly through the aisles with meals and drinks. Yet first class remained hushed, as if any sound might shatter the solemn air hanging over the cabin. The blonde woman sat stiffly like a statue, her lips parted as if to speak, but Marcus's gaze silenced her. Gone was the arrogance, gone was the defiance, only the awkwardness of someone stripped bare. Marcus set his glass of water down, exhaled slowly, and let his eyes sweep across the cabin. His voice was low, not loud, but it resonated, carrying weight to every corner. People often think power is shown through what they flaunt. Luxury cars, watches, or a first-class ticket. But real power doesn't need to show off. It lies in staying calm when you're disrespected, and then letting the truth speak for itself. The cabin fell silent again. Some leaned back, deep in thought. Others lowered their eyes, as though ashamed of what they'd silently condoned. The silver-haired woman smiled, her eyes kind but filled with recognition. "That's right. Truth doesn't need noise. It only needs a moment, and someone strong enough to hold it." The blonde woman lowered her head, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The mask of superiority she wore had shattered completely. Marcus gave a small nod, folded his arms, and leaned back in his seat. The flight ahead was long, but for him this little prologue had only just begun. The familiar ding chimed overhead, signaling the seatbelt light had been switched off. The plane was cruising smoothly now. Flight attendants rolled their carts down the aisle. Their polite smiles stretched a little too tight, still covering the tension that lingered in first class. But the cabin was far from normal. No cheerful chatter, no clinking glasses, no bursts of laughter. Instead, passengers sat straighter, adjusted their ties, and every so often sneaked glances at the black man seated across from 1A. Marcus King sat quietly, eyes fixed on the endless blue sky outside. He said nothing, but his presence alone seemed to pull gravity toward him. The lead flight attendant approached, bowing slightly. "Mr. King, our captain would like to extend his personal apology. After we've settled at cruising altitude, would you care to visit the cockpit and speak with him?" A soft murmur rippled through the cabin. Few passengers ever received such an invitation, but Marcus simply shook his head, his deep voice steady. "No need for that. I'm just a passenger on my own flight. Let things run as they normally should." The words sounded almost casual, yet they carried a thunderous reminder. This entire plane, every person aboard, was flying under his wings, literally. The blonde woman paled further, forcing a stiff smile that fooled no one. She had become invisible, her earlier arrogance crushed under the weight of the truth. Every gaze in the cabin now fell on Marcus, not with doubt or derision, but with careful respect. The silver-haired woman nodded knowingly, murmuring just loud enough for a few around her to hear. "This man doesn't chase power. Power finds its way to him." As the meal cart passed, a man in a black suit, around 50, leaned slightly toward Marcus. His Swiss watch gleamed under the cabin lights. His voice deep but cautious, the voice of a seasoned businessman. "Mr. King," he said, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'm Richard Hale, CEO of an international logistics group. I've heard your name in aviation circles, but I never expected to meet you in person. Truly an honor." Marcus turned politely, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hale. I've also heard of your company. Your transatlantic shipping routes were once a vital partner for Sky High." Heads lifted across the cabin. Few expected Marcus to know such detail. Richard Hale blinked, then chuckled heartily. "You're impressively well informed. I always assumed owners left the finer details to their staff. Marcus shrugged lightly, his tone calm but edged with wisdom. A CEO shouldn't just make decisions. He must understand every link in the chain, because if not, the smallest link can bring the whole system down. The silver-haired woman chuckled softly, shaking her head. Wise, very wise. From a few rows back, a familiar face emerged. Senator Wallace, whom some recognized from the news. He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on Marcus with thoughtful respect. Mr. King, your words ring true not just in business, but in politics as well. Sometimes one small misstep is enough to topple an entire career. The cabin fell utterly silent. What had started as a petty seat dispute had transformed into a gathering of power and reflection. Marcus King was no longer just a passenger, he was the gravity pulling every eye, every thought toward him. Senator Wallace leaned forward, his hands clasped over his knees, his voice slow but resonant. Mr. King, what I admire most isn't just that you run an airline. It's that you turn Sky High into a symbol, not just moving people, but carrying with it a message of trust and opportunity. In politics we call that soft power, and you've done it better than many nations. A few passengers leaned closer, not wanting to miss a word. The blonde woman's face drained of color, her eyes widening as she realized. The man she had dismissed so easily was being compared to entire countries. Marcus took a sip of water, set the glass down, his expression calm. You flatter me, Senator. I've only done what anyone should do, turn scars into fuel. Back then, some airports refused to let Sky High land, just because its owner was a black man. But I kept pushing, and now, if they refuse Sky High, they lose their entire international route. The words hit like a declaration. Several passengers nodded subtly, respect shining in their eyes. Wallace chuckled, his gaze bright with intrigue. That's exactly my point. You didn't just break barriers. You rewrote the rules, and that makes all the difference. Marcus paused for a moment, then replied, his voice low but heavy with meaning. Rules are always written by those in power. If I don't rewrite them, then I'll always be forced to play by someone else's. First class fell silent. His words didn't just resonate with the senator, they struck deep in the hearts of every passenger, many of whom had once assumed themselves above reproach. First class remained hushed, the weight of Marcus's last words still hanging heavy in the air. Then, suddenly, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Johnson. First, I'd like to thank you sincerely for choosing Sky High Airways for your journey today. I also wish to extend a very special greeting to someone on board, a man who turned the dream of flight into a reality not only for Sky High, but for millions of passengers around the world. Please join me in recognizing Mr. Marcus King, the founder and owner of Sky High Airways. The cabin froze. A few passengers dropped their utensils mid-meal, some even gasped aloud. Then, a scattering of applause began, spreading quickly until it filled the cabin. Even those who prided themselves on aloofness in first class found themselves clapping, conceding to the undeniable truth. The blonde woman lowered her head, her ears burning red, clutching her napkin so tightly it wrinkled in her fist. Every clap struck her pride like a blade. Marcus simply nodded, a thin smile curling at his lips. He didn't rise, didn't wave. He didn't need to. The truth spoke for itself through the captain's voice, through the applause of those who had once dared to look down on him. The silver-haired woman's eyes glimmered with delight as she whispered, You didn't just rewrite the rules. You made the whole world reread them. Marcus leaned back in his seat, eyes drifting shut for a moment. He knew this was only the overture. The real game awaited him in New York. The massive Boeing touched down on JFK's runway under the golden glow of late afternoon. The tires screeched, then rolled smoothly toward the terminal. A short journey, yet for many passengers in first class, it had felt like reading the first chapter of a novel. And Marcus King was undeniably its protagonist. When the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers rose to gather their belongings. But unlike at boarding, they moved with an odd restraint. Their stolen glances at Marcus no longer carried disdain, but a mix of respect and curiosity. The blonde woman hurried off, head lowered, eager to escape his presence. Yet even in her haste, she felt the invisible weight of countless eyes marking her humiliation. Marcus strode out calmly. Flight attendants bowed slightly as he passed, their respect unmistakable. At the cockpit door, Captain Johnson was waiting. He shook Marcus's hand firmly. Welcome back to New York, Mr. King. It was our honor to have you on board, Marcus replied with a faint smile. No theatrics, no need for grandeur. His quiet presence spoke louder than any words could. Outside the terminal, a sleek black limousine awaited. The driver rushed forward to open the door. Good evening, Mr. King. The board of directors is assembled at the Manhattan headquarters. They seem rather tense. Marcus stepped into the car, his eyes flashing with steel. In his mind, the plane incident was nothing but a prelude. The true battle awaited in that towering boardroom, where not just a first-class seat was at stake, but the very seat of the CEO itself. The limousine glided smoothly through Manhattan's bustling streets, past rushing crowds and neon lights. The Sky High Airways headquarters came into view, a towering glass and steel structure reflecting the New York night sky. Marcus stepped out. A line of employees waited in the lobby, bowing respectfully. Some eyes held admiration, while others betrayed unease. Rumors had already spread. Tonight, the board of directors planned to challenge Marcus's authority. He entered the private elevator, the cold steel panels reflecting the calm but determined man within. When the doors opened onto the top floor, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The boardroom stretched wide, glass walls overlooking the glittering cityscape. A long walnut table dominated the room, surrounded by nearly 20 board members, faces of high finance. Some fidgeted, some sat stiffly with arms crossed, others forced uneasy smiles. At the head of the opposition stood Charles Whitmore, a silver-haired investor with a gravelly voice. He tapped the table firmly. "Mr. King, at last you're here. We've been waiting. There are urgent matters to address tonight, and we expect clear answers." The air thickened. All eyes fixed on Marcus, but instead of taking his seat at the head of the table, he paused at the doorway, smiled faintly, and strode in slowly. "Matters, you say?" Marcus's voice was deep, even, carrying across the room. "If the matter is me, then tonight will indeed be interesting." Several board members raised their brows, unsure if it was a joke or a challenge. Yet behind Marcus's calm demeanor burned a quiet fire, signaling a clash that promised to be anything but ordinary. Marcus walked to the head chair and sat down with ease. His movements were so calm it felt as though he was hosting a dinner, not entering a boardroom showdown that could decide the future of an airline empire. Charles Whitmore clasped his hands, his gaze cutting. "Mr. King, let's get straight to the point. Our quarterly reports show operating costs at Sky High rising sharply. Several international routes are no longer profitable, and there are rumors you're investing in risky ventures outside aviation. As shareholders, we deserve to know. Are you still putting the company's best interests first?" A few heads nodded. Others stared hard at Marcus as if trying to strip away his composure. The tension was thick. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed amplified. Marcus slowly loosened his tie, adjusting his collar. Far from looking pressured, he resembled a man preparing for a chess match with every move already planned. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus began, his voice steady, filling the room. "You're right. Operating costs are up. Some routes aren't profitable. And yes, I'm investing beyond aviation. But that's not recklessness. That's vision." Whitmore's brow furrowed as murmurs stirred among the board. Marcus leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice like steel. "Aviation isn't just about moving people from A to B. It's the backbone of trade, the bridge between economies. If we don't expand into logistics, technology, renewable energy, Sky High will be left behind. I'm not managing for today. I'm managing for the next decade." The room fell still. One younger board member, silent until now, nodded almost involuntarily, as though Marcus's reasoning struck a chord, but Whitmore refused to yield. He slammed his hand on the table. "Fine words, Mr. King, but shareholders don't live off theories. We live off results. And if you can't deliver, perhaps it's time for a different CEO." The words cracked through the boardroom like lightning, jolting every member into silence. Yet Marcus only leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a cold smile. The boardroom air was thick, Whitmore's words still reverberating like the aftershock of an explosion. Many board members sat frozen, barely daring to move. Marcus folded his arms, leaning back, his eyes narrowing with challenge. Then, slowly, his voice cut through the tension, low and cold. "Mr. Whitmore, you're right about one thing. Shareholders demand results, and I've prepared results. But perhaps not the kind you were hoping for. He gestured subtly. The doors opened, and his personal aide, a sharp-suited woman with bronze skin, entered, placing thick folders in front of each board member. The shuffle of papers echoed across the room. Marcus tapped his finger lightly on the table. These are the projected profits for the next quarter, not just from aviation. This is Sky High's global logistics expansion, secured in partnership with the 3 largest shipping companies in the world. Contracts signed. Revenue forecasted to grow 35% within 2 years. Several board members leaned back, eyes widening. The younger member from earlier nearly shot out of his chair. If it works, Sky High could become the largest multimodal transport empire on the planet. Marcus nodded, then locked his gaze on Whitmore. You call me reckless. I call it foresight. You say I bring no results. This is my answer. Whitmore clenched his fists, his face reddening, yet no words came out. Around the table, murmurs spread, heads nodding, the balance clearly tilting toward Marcus. Marcus's smile cut like a blade. And one more thing. If anyone here thinks they can replace me, let them remember this. Sky High is not just an airline. Sky High is Marcus King. Remove me, and you risk losing the empire itself. The room fell into dead silence. Not a single breath dared disturb it. At the far end of the table, Whitmore ground his teeth, but behind his eyes flickered the unmistakable spark of unease. The meeting adjourned under a heavy silence. Board members gathered their papers, a few stepping forward to shake Marcus's hand, their uneasy smiles betraying reluctant respect. But one man left without masking his fury. Charles Whitmore. He stormed out, his footsteps heavy, eyes dark with malice. In the quiet hallway, his aide asked softly, Mr. Whitmore, the plan failed. Do you want to continue? Whitmore stopped, narrowing his gaze through the glass wall at the city lights of New York, glittering like thousands of tiny fires. A cold smile spread across his lips. Continue. Marcus King may have won in the boardroom, but out there, the world isn't always fair. I'll find his weakness, and when I do, he'll fall harder than ever. Meanwhile, Marcus remained alone in the boardroom. He stared out at the night sky through the vast glass walls, his expression calm, contemplative. He knew today's victory was temporary. Whitmore was not the type to retreat quietly, and wolves in finance always lurked in the shadows. His phone buzzed on the table. Marcus picked up. The voice of an old friend and loyal shareholder came through. Marcus, I just heard Whitmore has already reached out to the press. He wants to spread rumors about your outside investments. You need to be careful. Marcus chuckled, a calm but knowing smile forming. Let him spread them. I have a way to turn lies into a counterattack. The louder the wolf growls, the surer I am that I'm on the right path. Outside, New York blazed with light, but hidden within the glow was the beginning of a new shadow game. The next morning, New York's biggest financial papers splashed the headlines. Marcus King gambling big. Sky High jumps into risky ventures. Is the founder of Sky High betting against shareholders' future? From airline CEO to logistics mogul, reckless gamble or masterstroke. Television anchors repeated the story, accompanied by interviews with experts, many of them clearly influenced by Whitmore. Their voices carried doubt. No one can run an airline and simultaneously dive into shipping and tech. This is a dangerous gamble. On social media, the public split into 2 camps. Some panicked, fearing Sky High stock would plunge. Others were intrigued, praising Marcus as the man rewriting the rules, a black CEO bold enough to challenge the system itself. In his top-floor office, Marcus skimmed through the headlines and comments flashing across the screens. His face showed no anger, no confusion. Instead, his eyes gleamed, like a man spotting opportunity in the heart of a storm. His aide entered, setting down a cup of coffee. Mr. King, the rumors are spreading fast. The board may call an emergency meeting. Marcus sipped calmly, then smiled faintly. Good, let them. In business, crisis isn't a threat. It's a test. And I've never failed a test. 2 days later, the press swarmed into Sky High Airways' main hall. The rumors had rippled across Wall Street, and now everyone was waiting to see how Marcus King, the powerful black CEO, would respond. Camera flashes exploded as Marcus stepped onto the stage. He wore a simple black suit, a deep navy tie, nothing flashy. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with unshakable confidence. A reporter shouted, Mr. King, are you really gambling with Sky High by investing outside aviation? Marcus smiled faintly, nodded to the hall, and spoke in a voice both warm and commanding. Yes, I am taking risks. But let me be clear. Risk does not mean recklessness. Risk means having the courage to move forward. While others hesitate, the room buzzed. He lifted a folder, and the massive screen behind him lit up with charts of Sky-High's expansion into logistics, clean energy, and technology. These are not just investments. This is the future. While other airlines fight over seats and flights, Sky-High will control the movement of goods, energy, and data across the globe. And you, shareholders, investors, passengers, you won't just be buying a ticket for a flight. You'll be buying a ticket to the future. The first applause came from the back, from a group of younger analysts. Then it spread, growing louder until it drowned out the clicking of cameras. Some reporters nodded, others even stood to capture the moment as though history was being made. Elsewhere, the blonde woman, the one who had stolen Marcus's seat on the plane, watched the broadcast from a cafe. Her latte trembled in her hand as she whispered bitterly, "He's not just a CEO, he's a storm." In a lavish, dimly lit room on the Upper East Side, Charles Whitmore sat before a television. On the screen, Marcus King replayed. Flashes of cameras, roaring applause, headlines hailing him as the Black CEO rewriting the future. Whitmore's whiskey glass shook in his hand, amber liquid swirling violently. His face burned red, eyes blazing. With a crash, he slammed the glass down, the crack of splintering crystal echoing like clenched teeth. Damn him. He turned public opinion into a weapon. Every lie I planted. He spun into a victory speech. His aide, trembling, bowed slightly. "Mr. Whitmore, perhaps we should retreat for now. The public pressure—" "No," Whitmore roared, slamming his palm on the desk, scattering papers everywhere. "A wolf doesn't retreat just because sheep are applauding. If I can't take him down in the boardroom, if the press sides with him, then I'll find another way. Law, politics, or even enemies in the shadows." He turned, his gaze ice-cold, each word cut like a knife. "Dig up every weakness Marcus King has. Family, friends, allies. Leave nothing untouched. If you want to bring down an empire, you start with its smallest bricks." Meanwhile, Marcus stepped off the stage into the backstage corridor. His phone buzzed. Messages of congratulations. Sky-high stock rebounding. The public chanting his name. Yet deep down, Marcus felt it. The real storm was only beginning to form. 1 week later, Marcus stepped into his office to a flood of red notifications lighting up his phone. Messages from aides, emails from the legal department, and fresh screaming headlines in the press. Marcus King under antitrust investigation? Sky CEO faces possible court battle. Hero or tyrant of the skies? Morning news shows ran breaking reports, flashing clips of Marcus stepping out of his limousine, edited to look like a perp walk. The anchor's voice was grave. Sources say the Department of Justice is reviewing Sky-High's shipping investments for potential market manipulation. Marcus King could be called to testify before Congress next month. Inside Sky-High's emergency boardroom, lawyers and senior executives erupted at once. "We need an immediate legal strategy. The market will react badly. Our stock could nosedive. Mr. King, this is a real legal war. Someone is clearly targeting you." Marcus sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, eyes cold as steel as he watched the news play. He knew instantly. This was Whitmore's hand. A wolf never accepts defeat in the boardroom. He would weaponize the law instead. Marcus nodded slowly, his voice resonant and steady. "Fine. If he wants to drag me into court, then I'll turn the courtroom into a stage, and the whole world will see who's truly abusing power." The executives exchanged glances, fear mixing with awe. None of them had ever seen a man treat a legal assault not as a crisis, but as an opportunity. In the top-floor office, the air was thick with the scent of coffee and freshly printed paper. Stacks of legal documents sprawled across the long table. Lawyers fired off arguments like machine guns, while aides clattered away at laptops. A veteran attorney, his hair silver but his eyes still razor-sharp, stood and explained, "Mr. King, the prosecution will argue that Sky-High is manipulating the market, controlling both the skies and expanding into shipping. They'll claim you're violating antitrust laws." Another executive jumped in. "They'll try to paint you as a monopolist, a mogul bent on swallowing the market whole." Marcus listened quietly, then smiled faintly. "Then we'll show the world the exact opposite. I'm not taking food off anyone's plate. I'm building a bigger table, so more people can eat. He rose and moved to the screen, where charts of growth projections glowed brightly. At the hearing, I won't just talk about Sky High. I'll talk about small towns now connected to the world through new routes. I'll talk about thousands of workers in logistics gaining stable jobs. I'll talk about clean energy initiatives cutting emissions. If they want me in front of the public, then I'll use the public as my witness. The room went silent. The silver-haired lawyer finally nodded, his voice low, almost reverent. Mr. King, you're planning to turn the hearing into a rallying cry? Marcus's smile sharpened. Part pride, part defiance. No, I'm planning to turn it into a lesson, to show Congress and Wall Street alike. Power doesn't come from opposing me. It comes from standing with me. As the hearing approached, Washington, D.C. braced for a political storm. Reporters camped outside the Capitol since dawn. Microphones, cameras, and long lenses aimed in every direction. News networks streamed live, their chyrons blaring, Marcus King before Congress. Triumph or takedown. America's most powerful black CEO testifies. Visionary or monopolist. Crowds filled the plaza. Students waved banners reading, King inspires us. My logistics workers held signs saying, jobs thanks to Sky High. So, while protesters carried placards declaring, say no to monopoly, the atmosphere buzzed like a championship match about to begin. At exactly 9 a.m., camera flashes exploded. A convoy of sleek black limousines rolled up to the Capitol steps. The door opened and Marcus King emerged. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit, no flashy accessories, only a small sky-high lapel pin glinting in the sun. For a heartbeat, the crowd went silent, measuring the scale of the storm that had just arrived. Reporters shouted all at once, Mr. King, are you afraid of losing your CEO seat? Mr. King, are you manipulating the market? Mr. King, is this the fall of your arrogance? Marcus paused, turned toward the forest of microphones aimed at him. He didn't dodge. He didn't rush. Slowly, he lifted his sunglasses, revealing eyes sharp as steel, and spoke in a voice that carried like thunder. I did not come here to defend myself. I came here to make it clear. Sky High doesn't pull anyone down. We lift everyone higher. A ripple surged through the crowd. Cameras flashed nonstop. One journalist whispered to another, he's not walking in like a defendant. He's walking in like a head of state. Marcus continued up the steps, his stride steady, deliberate, leaving behind a sea of lenses desperate to capture every frame. The congressional hearing room blazed under bright lights. Rows of long microphones pointed like steel spears toward the witness table. Dozens of reporters crowded the back, cameras rolling nonstop. It felt less like a hearing, more like a public trial where every word could ricochet. Marcus King sat at the center, posture upright, face calm. Across from him, a line of lawmakers studied him with sharp eyes. The chair struck the gavel. The hearing on Sky High Airways and its outside investments will now come to order. Immediately, Senator Harland, a politician famed for his hardline stance, fired the first shot. Mr. King, you control the skies, and now you're moving into shipping. Are you planning to turn Sky High into a global monopoly? A murmur swept through the room. The question was a bullet. Marcus smiled faintly, dipping his head. Senator, the word monopoly suggests blocking others. But I'm not blocking anyone. I'm opening doors. When Sky High launches a route to a small city, that city gains tourists, jobs, opportunity. When Sky High partners with shipping, goods move faster, cheaper. Consumers win. If that's what we call a monopoly, then perhaps we're using the wrong word. Some younger lawmakers nodded. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts. Then Senator Collins, her tone icy, pressed on. But do you not fear this rapid expansion could destabilize the market? If Sky High collapses, millions would be at risk. Marcus slowly swept his gaze across the chamber before replying. Senator Collins, the greatest risk isn't doing too much. It's doing too little. The world changes every day. If I don't prepare for the future, then it's millions of jobs that will collapse instead. The murmurs rose again, this time tinged with admiration. The chair leaned back, tapping the gavel lightly. Mr. King, I must admit, you have a way of turning this hearing into a classroom. Marcus smiled quietly. He knew he had just scored a point, but the battle was far from over. The hearing had begun to tilt in Marcus's favor, until suddenly an older senator, his face grim, spoke up. Mr. King, we've just received a document from an anonymous source. It claims that in your early years you accepted funding from a questionable investment fund, one allegedly tied to international money laundering. Do you deny this? The chamber erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing in blinding bursts. Marcus sat still, not a muscle flinching. But he knew instantly this was Charles Whitmore's hand. With one stone he had shifted the room from admiration to suspicion. Another senator leaned in, voice dripping with sarcasm. You say Sky High is a symbol of opportunity, but if its foundation was built on dirty money, how are you any different from the very tyrants you criticize? Outside, the crowd exploded. Social media buzzed with headlines. Marcus King tied to money laundering? Black CEO on the brink? Marcus's lawyer leaned close, pale-faced. Mr. King, if you don't handle this carefully, the press will tear you apart. Marcus placed both hands on the table, lifting his head slowly, his eyes blazing cold and resolute. His voice rang out, deliberate, clear, echoing through the chamber. Senators, yes, early in my career, I took capital from an investment fund. I never hid that. And if anyone here has ever built something from nothing without once shaking hands with someone they didn't fully trust, please, raise your hand. Not a single hand rose. The room froze. Marcus pressed on, his tone stronger now. The difference is this. I used that money to build something clean, transparent, and lasting. I turned it into hundreds of thousands of jobs, into an airline that reshaped global travel. I'm not proud of where it began, but I am proud that from the shadows, I created light. A ripple spread, not outrage, but reluctant agreement. Cameras flashed again, this time capturing not a scandal, but a moment of defiance. At the far end, Charles Whitmore clenched his fists, the smug smile slowly fading from his lips. The chamber was silent after Marcus's challenge about shaking hands with the untrustworthy. He leaned closer to the microphone, lowering his voice, his words carrying the weight of memory. I started Sky High in a cramped rental room in Queens. Back then, I had nothing but a reckless dream that one day, kids who looked like me could sit on airplanes like anyone else, not just watch them fly overhead, but step aboard and rise with the world. Some reporters stopped typing, caught in his cadence. I knocked on dozens of bank doors. They all said no. I pitched to hundreds of investors. They laughed in my face. They said, "A black man starting an airline? Don't be ridiculous." Marcus paused, his eyes sharp with both pain and pride. And then, when no one else would believe in me, I took the only money I could find. Yes, it wasn't perfect. Yes, it carried a stain. But without that moment, there would be no Sky High today. And more importantly, there would be no hundreds of thousands of families with steady jobs, no small towns connected to the world, no children who once looked like me now daring to dream of the skies. Several senators shifted uneasily. Senator Collins, the one who had grilled him earlier, lowered her gaze, her eyes glinting with a hint of respect. Marcus ended with steel in his tone. My past wasn't perfect, but I used that imperfection to build a better future. For everyone. Applause broke out from the back rows, where younger journalists sat. Then it spread, slow but unstoppable. Cameras flashed. Not to hunt him, but to capture history. Outside, the hashtag #Majdarin from shadows to sky high began trending across social media. In a lavish hotel suite near the Capitol, Charles Whitmore sat glued to the massive TV screen. At first, his grin stretched wide when Marcus was grilled about dirty money. But when the hearing chamber erupted in applause, when hashtags flooded social media, his smile froze, then vanished. He slammed his glass of whiskey down, snarling through clenched teeth. Impossible! He turned an accusation into a hero's tale, and those fools applauded him for it. His aide spoke nervously. Mr. Whitmore, public opinion is swinging entirely in Marcus's favor. Maybe we should— Silence. Whitmore roared, his eyes bloodshot. If the crowd loves him for rising from the shadows, then I'll drag him back into the shadows. Not with rumors this time. With proof. He yanked out a thick folder, slamming it onto the table. The cover was stamped, confidential. The aide's voice quivered. These are medical records? Whitmore's grin slithered back across his face. Yes, Marcus King was hospitalized years ago for a nervous breakdown. If the world learns that America's most powerful black CEO has a mental health history, who will trust him to run a billion-dollar empire? But, sir, the aide stammered, It could backfire. If people see him as a symbol, they might sympathize. Whitmore cut him off, voice cold as steel. No, people respect strength, not weakness. I'll leak these records right in the middle of the hearing. He won't be a hero anymore. He'll be a patient masquerading as one. Meanwhile, in the chamber, Marcus prepared for the next round of questions. He had no idea the storm about to strike, one aimed straight at the most vulnerable chapter of his past. The gavel struck, and the hearing resumed. Senators fired questions, reporters scribbled furiously. Suddenly, an older senator rose, his voice heavy, carrying the weight of a bombshell. "Mr. King!"
I present this document.
Medical records show you were once hospitalized for a nervous breakdown years ago. A man who has collapsed mentally? Can he truly carry the weight of a billion-dollar empire? Can shareholders, employees, and this nation trust such a man? The chamber erupted. Murmurs surged like waves. Cameras flashed nonstop. Reporters shouted, "Marcus King! Mental health issues! Is this true?" Outside, social media ignited, a new hashtag spreading fast. King unstable. Marcus's lawyer leaned in, pale-faced. "Mr. King, this could be fatal. If you stay silent or deflect, they'll take it as an admission." Marcus sat tall, hands resting on the mic. He swept his gaze across the room, filled with curious, skeptical, scornful eyes. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating, as if the world itself held its breath. Then Marcus bowed his head slightly, drew a deep breath, and spoke. Low, steady, but thunderous. "Yes, I broke down. I sat in a hospital room believing it was over. I was weak. I was lost. But that moment taught me, true strength is not never falling. It is rising after you've fallen." The murmurs hushed, faces stiffened, locked on him. Marcus continued, voice ringing like a storm. "You call it weakness. I call it humanity. And if humanity disqualifies me as CEO, then remember, it's humanity that allows me to understand the millions who struggle every single day to stand tall. Sky High exists for them, and because I have never forgotten that I was once one of them." The chamber froze. Then suddenly applause broke out from the back. Hesitant at first, then spreading, swelling, crashing across the hall. Reporters scrambled to capture it. A new hashtag overtook the old, "The King Stronger." In a hotel suite across town, Whitmore slammed his hand on the table, roaring in fury. "No!
Impossible."
He turned illness into power? In the aftermath of the hearing, America erupted, from Wall Street to Main Street, from college cafes to shareholder boardrooms. Everyone was talking about Marcus King. Headlines shifted overnight. From breakdown to breakthrough, Marcus King turns weakness into weapon. The Black CEO and the Lesson of Humanity in Leadership. Congress listened. The public applauded. Social media surged with Marcus King Stronger, trending worldwide within hours. Clips of Marcus declaring, "I fell and I rose," spread like wildfire, inspiring millions. Inside Sky High's Manhattan headquarters, Marcus stood before the massive glass window, overlooking the city ablaze with nightlights. Behind him, his closest circle gathered: lawyers, communications chiefs, loyal shareholders. A young executive spoke, his voice brimming with excitement. "Mr. King, the public is with us now. Whitmore has lost ground completely. This is the moment to strike the final blow." Marcus turned, eyes sharp as blades. He didn't smile, but his voice carried weight, steady and decisive. Whitmore fought from the shadows. "I'll end him in the light. Prepare to release every piece of evidence. His manipulation of the press, his leaks of confidential files, his violation of federal law in hacking my medical records. Once the truth is out, he'll have no place left in finance." The room ignited with energy. Heads nodded, determination blazing in their eyes. Marcus turned back to the skyline. Out there, millions were watching, and he knew. The final move was at hand. The next morning, America's media landscape exploded. Sky High held a nationally televised press conference, and this time Marcus didn't stand alone. Flanking him were lawyers, tech experts, even a few senators who had backed him after the hearing. Marcus stepped to the podium, his voice cutting through like a blade. "Last week, you saw me questioned. Today, I have questions of my own. Who hacked into my private medical records? Who fed the press lies to manipulate public opinion? And who tried to weaponize the law to destroy a CEO simply because he is black and because he dares to dream bigger? The massive screen behind him lit up. Emails leaked from Whitmore himself, instructing a tabloid, "Run it immediately, verification irrelevant." Next, documents revealed he had hired hackers to breach a hospital system and steal Marcus's medical records. Gasps filled the hall. Reporters shouted over one another, "My God, that's direct evidence." Whitmore just committed a federal crime. Marcus lowered his voice, every word resonating. Whitmore wanted me to fall in darkness. But the truth cannot be buried. The truth always finds the light. Outside, social media erupted. Whitmore exposed, justice for Marcus, and King Stronger all surged to the top of trending charts. In his opulent office, Whitmore hurled his laptop to the floor, his face pale as ash. His phone rang endlessly, lawyers, partners, shareholders, all abandoning ship. His empire cracked wide open before his eyes. Meanwhile, Marcus left the podium to thunderous applause. He knew the endgame had begun. The news spread like wildfire. The Department of Justice officially launched an investigation into Charles Whitmore for data theft, media manipulation, and bribery. Newspapers that once praised him now plastered his face on front pages with the headline, "From Power Broker to Federal Felon." On Wall Street, stocks tied to Whitmore's empire plunged. Partners cut ties overnight. His phone rang endlessly, but every call was the same. Contracts canceled, relationships severed. In his lavish penthouse, Whitmore sat alone in darkness, the whiskey bottle nearly empty. The TV replayed footage of Marcus leaving the press conference to thunderous applause. Whitmore rasped bitterly, "How? How did a black kid from Queens bring me down?" But no answer came. Power, reputation, allies, all gone. Meanwhile, at Sky High headquarters, Marcus entered the boardroom. Unlike the tense atmosphere weeks earlier, today it was filled with energy and pride. Shareholders rose to their feet, applauding him like a head of state. A longtime shareholder, voice trembling with emotion, declared, "Mr. King, you didn't just defend Sky High, you elevated it. From this day forward, Sky High isn't just an airline, it's a symbol of trust." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady, voice ringing with quiet authority. "We will fly higher still." Outside, the New York night sky blazed with light, reflecting the silhouette of the man who had turned humiliation on a plane into the beginning of a legendary journey. 1 month later, New York's skies blazed with fireworks. Sky High Airways marked its 20th anniversary at Times Square, where tens of thousands gathered. Towering LED screens replayed the journey. Marcus King once humiliated on a plane, his fiery testimony before Congress, and the moment the world rose to applaud him. Marcus stepped onto the stage. No wall of lawyers, no phalanx of guards, just his calm smile and unshakable gaze. The crowd thundered his name. "King! King! King!" He raised his hand for silence. His voice rang out, steady and resonant, cutting through the roar. "The day I was humiliated on a plane, they thought I was just a passenger in the wrong seat. But I proved to the world, my seat was never theirs to decide. It was mine to create." The crowd erupted. Tears streamed down faces. Young black men and women held up banners reading, "If he can, we can." Marcus lifted his eyes to the night sky, where a sky-high jet soared past, leaving a gleaming trail among the fireworks. His final words boomed, a promise etched into history. "We don't just fly to reach a destination. We fly to remind the world that no limit can keep us on the ground." The cheers shook Times Square. Cameras captured the moment, and by dawn, headlines around the globe proclaimed it, "The night a black CEO made the sky his legacy."